Hi, my name is Tom Rawls and I'm the pastor here at Proclaimers, and I'd like to welcome you to our YouTube channel. Sunday by Sunday we take great delight in sharing what the Bible has to say. The Bible, probably one of the most relevant books in the entire world, with principles that touch every area of our lives. One of the key ingredients to the life of our church and its preaching is the variety of those who actually get up and speak. From myself with over 40 years of experience, Dr. Phil Temple, who is a psychiatrist, doctor, medical doctor, again with 15 years of experience at preaching. We've just had such a phenomenal blessing by having so many great speakers. We hope you enjoy this particular YouTube video of our latest ministry here at Proclaimers. So thank you again for joining us and God bless you.
Right now, Dr. Phil Temple.
So I don't know if you're aware of this today, but you are in the presence of a celebrity. Oh yes, you are. I know some of you are looking around. I don't know why you're looking around. Right here. I know what you're thinking. I don't know if you are a celebrity, Phil. Well, I'm going to prove that I'm a celebrity to you right now, because way back in 2006, I was featured on the Network Norwich website. Oh yes, this is a website for kind of shares about Christian organizations and what they've got going on in Norwich, and there was a story about me. I was going off on my medical elective. Have we got any med students in the house tonight? Just one? No, more than one. Come on. There we go. So I was heading off on my medical elective to Hillsong's Medical Centre in Sydney, Australia, and we had an article about it that was on the Network Norwich website. You see, in my mind, this also made it into the EDP, but it turns out there's no evidence of this, and you'll see why in a minute. But would anybody like to see the photo? The photo that was associated with this article? No? Okay, we won't. That's fine. We'll move. Oh, okay, you do. Pastor Tom says yes, so that's always a yes. Let's have a look. There we go. They said to me when I showed this in Ipswich this morning, they were like, oh, the quality's not very good. I'm like, well, that's a bit rude. But, I mean, in fairness, you can see why they've pixelated it so badly, because it's the only way to hide the fact that I have what I believe you refer to as a faux hawk, which is where you kind of push your hair together in the middle. And it makes, this was all the rage well before I tried it, actually, but that's by the by. It's weird because this photo, this newspaper article, well, website article, whatever, did not springboard me into success in the media. I did not get a succession of requests for my time. I was not bombarded with modeling inquiries, strangely enough. But this photo has been surprisingly persistent. I've done a couple of TEDx talks, and the first TEDx talk I did, they had a lady who was doing like a pictorial representation of your talk, which was amazing. It was really powerful. But beforehand, she did a little photo, like a little sketch of you in the corner of the board. And despite the fact that it was probably a decade later, this was the photo she used. So I have this beautiful visual representation of my talk and this terrible picture of me in the corner. You meant to have more sympathy for me than that. There we go. This hairstyle, as questionable as it is, has followed me around for years. But then I just go from one questionable hairstyle to the other, so it doesn't really matter, does it? But you know, the point of this article, thank you, Ian. The point of this article was not to make me famous. We actually just thought that it was a way to kind of get the news out about church. We realized that, like, websites and newspapers are not so interested in stories about organizations, but they are interested in stories about people. So we thought, why don't we put a people slant on this, and maybe people will pay attention. We actually tried this in the university newspaper, Concrete, as well, and they did this article about me and about the fact we just relaunched our evening service back then, which seems like a long time ago now. I remember because one of the other guys in the Christian Union came up to me and was like, oh, so you're the future of the church, are you now, Phil? I was like, no, that's not what it's all about. It's just about trying to get the message out there. But why do I bring this up now? Why do I show you? Why do I subject you to this photo 15 years down the line? Is it because I'm still living on the past glories of my failed media career? Is it because I'm still pining for my 15 minutes of fame all over again? No. It's because the topic that I want to talk to you about today is celebrity. We're starting a new series. Pastor Tom kicked it off this morning. I had the privilege of kicking it off in Ipswich this morning. Sam started it in our campus in Bratislava, and it's a series that is called Fatal Distractions. And as Pastor Tom defined distractions this morning, they are something that diverts your attention from its rightful focus, something that attracts your attention and draws you in a different direction, away from a meaningful venture. But it's not just the distraction part that is important. The fatal part is important too. Because we live in a world of constant distractions, but some distractions are more dangerous than others. Some distractions are harmful to us. I've just been driving between here and Ipswich in the middle of all of this rain, and how many of you know that a distraction at the wrong time on that road could have proved fatal to me? But there are distractions in your life that will prove fatal as well. Not to your physical life necessarily, but that will cause harm to your future, that will cause harm to your sense of purpose, that will cause harm to your dreams and your destiny and what it is that you can achieve out of life. And I want to focus on the distractions that stem from our 21st century obsession with celebrity. You've taken it down, haven't you? Good. We live in a world that is more focused on celebrity than it ever was before. We now have people who are famous just for being famous. You know, once upon a time, people were famous because they'd achieved something. They'd shown themselves to be good at making music or successful in the field of sports or to have expertise in a certain area. But now we have people who are just famous for being famous. We have reality TV stars and social media influencers who have been catapulted into the public eye with no apparent skills, just a decent publicist or a lot of followers on social media. I remember a recent occasion that underlined this. I was on the BBC website and there was an article of medical advice. But this medical advice was provided by the guy who was a doctor that was a contestant on Love Island. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I'm sure he's a perfectly nice bloke, but he's not vastly experienced from what I remember. And I just thought it was interesting that, the website of our national broadcaster was looking to this guy to provide medical expertise. Occupation doctor, speciality, taking my shirt off in the Mediterranean. I've thought about trying it myself, but it wouldn't work quite so well. Partly because my wife would have a problem with me going on Love Island, and secondly because they wouldn't be able to show it if I took my shirt off. But social media has a lot to answer for in this too. Social media has given us the illusion of influence. It creates a fantasy that we can all be famous if only we can create content that is interesting or compelling enough. If we can bake the prettiest cakes, or go on the most exciting holidays, or post the best fitness regime, then we can achieve some kind of celebrity status. That people will be so interested in what we post that we can actually earn our living from doing it. So social media creates this illusion that celebrity is accessible to all. Now, by now, you might well be thinking, well, I'm not particularly bothered about being famous, Phil, or becoming a celebrity. But while we might not all want to be celebrities, I think the focus of our society on this idea of celebrity creates particular distractions that are common to many of us. And the first is the distraction of being celebrated. Because we long to be celebrated. We all like recognition. We want people to notice us, to appreciate us, to value us. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but this is heightened in our modern society. It is reinforced by social media, where every post, every photo, every thought, idea, and experience is rated in some way. There's a growing body of research about the impact that this has on our self-esteem. If we are not careful, we can live lives that are defined by likes and comments, where whether or not we get a response on social media is the most important thing to us. And this is a really fickle way of defining our self-worth and value. It is a dangerous road to head down as we seek out experiences that others will find interesting or worthy of comment. There's actually a danger that we end up only doing things that we think we will be celebrated for. Only doing things when they think that they will garner us praise or attention. And there are those too who go on to social media for comfort, who end up posting things about their lives that are not helpful, that should not be shared publicly in the hope of gaining some measure of engagement or support. Our modern focus on attention leads to a world where we all want to be celebrated. And it also creates the sense that our lives should somehow be special. Again, this is triggered by social media, where we look at the photoshopped version of people's lives. What we see on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter is not the reality. It is the airbrushed version. It is the version that people put out there for us to consume. And when we see the interesting things that others experience or achieve, we begin to think that that is what our lives should look like. And there is a danger then, as well as chasing likes, we also chase what's special or different. We chase novelty, we chase excitement, we chase the unexpected. We chase these experiences that set off dopamine in our brains, this little reward chemical, this same chemical that fires off when you see a notification pop up on your phone to tell you that someone has liked your post. And there is nothing wrong with novelty necessarily, but these chemicals that create this little buzz of excitement do not necessarily create satisfaction in our lives. And what if we allow this pursuit of novelty to define our lives? Is there not a danger that we go seeking novel experiences instead of meaningful experiences? That we chase special at the expense of what we have? That we switch job, change relationship, move church because we are seeking that special feeling? These are important questions. Whether we long for fame or fortune or not, because they speak to how we define success in our lives. Should we be aiming to be celebrated? Should we chase what is special? Or are these distractions which derail true success? To explore this question, I want to go to an account from the Bible that many of us will be aware of, even if you're not someone that's normally found in church. It might not be instantly apparent why this applies to what we're talking about today. So just come with me on the journey, whatever your situation, and we'll see where we end up. We're going to read from Matthew 14. And in Matthew 14, where we pick up this account, Jesus has just fed 5,000 men, plus women and children, on one boy's packed lunch. And it says this. In verse 22, it says, immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat. So they're on the side of a lake, by the way. It says, immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go out ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And later that night, he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they had climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. This is one of those famous Bible accounts, and it warrants attention to get a feel for what's really going on here. To start with, before this all begins, the disciples have witnessed this incredible miracle as Jesus feeds all these people. Actually, they didn't just witness it, they were a part of it. They were the ones who were handing out the food, and they were the ones who collected the basketfuls of leftovers at the end. But before they took in, Jesus tells them to head over to the other side of this lake. And it's fair to say that the disciples are not pleased about this prospect. You know, a number of the disciples were experienced fishermen. They could probably see the signs of the storm that was to come on the horizon. Where it says that Jesus made them get into the boat, the word that's translated there is anankezo. It means to compel, to do so with urgency, to force. In other words, Jesus forces them to get into the boat. What happens next? But because this is familiar, I thought it might be more fun if we acted it out. So I've got a boat. And they're going to come and put my boat just here on the stage. As you see, it's a slightly larger boat than we probably need. So I've got a boat, and I guess what I also need is Jesus. Do you just want to, just kind of there would be great. That's wonderful. It's a big boat, isn't it? I mean, there were like 12 of them in it, so it's fair enough. So we've got a boat. Now we need Jesus. And so Jesus needs to have long hair and a beard, doesn't he, Andy? So Jesus, do you want to make your way to the back of the room? I mean, I thought Jesus was a bit taller, but we'll go with what we have. It's all right. I'll be Peter. Let me move this out of the way. I'll be Peter. He's Jesus, which I guess means that, I guess that makes you guys the storm. So you're going to try and make a storm. Like I got our special effects team. They've been working on it outside all day. But I figured that it'd be good if we can. So how we do this is you need to make the noise of the wind. So like we've done this. I think I've done this before, but it's kind of fun. And you also need like the pitter-patter of the rain. So if you just like, yeah, that's great. And then if you want the waves, you just need to sway. So if you just start swaying. So let me get in the boat. And Jesus, do you want to start to walk? We might struggle to see Jesus over the waves, but Jesus, do you want to make your way forward through the waves? So as Jesus approaches us through the wind and the waves, we cry out. We are terrified. Oh my gosh, it's a ghost. It's a ghost. And I'm Peter, right? So Jesus, if it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water. Can I just say, if you're in a situation where you think there might be something dangerous out there in the dark, don't ask it to come towards you. Or don't tell it to tell you to come towards it. That doesn't sound like a very... If you're in a car park tonight and you see someone who looks a bit shady, don't go, hey, do you want me to come over to you? Don't do that. But that's what Peter does. Jesus, tell me to come to you on the water. Come to me. Keep going. So Peter begins to make his way. And while his eyes are fixed on Jesus, he is able to walk on the waves. But then he starts to worry about the slightly half-hearted storm that's going on around him. And he begins to sink beneath the water. And Jesus reaches down and pulls him up. And I think this is a good place to start when we think about the topic of fatal distractions. Because while ever Peter's focus is on, stay there, Jesus, while ever Peter's focus is on Jesus, he is able to walk on the water. But when he begins to see the distractions around him, that's when he begins to sink. When he gets caught up in the stresses and the strains of life is when he begins to fall beneath the surface of the waves. And part of the reason that I wanted us to act this out today is because I wanted you to see the position of what's happening here. Because Peter begins to sink beneath the water, but Jesus is still standing on the waves. Come over here, Jesus. Reach out your hand. Come on. So as Peter is caught up in all of these distractions, he begins to sink. But notice that Jesus is still standing on the surface of the water. As Peter begins to sink down and all of this stuff is getting on top of him and all of this stuff feels over his head, where is Jesus? Still stood on the water. So what is over Peter's head is still under Jesus' feet. And you need to know this if you feel like you're caught in the middle of the storm. You need to know this if you feel like you're being dragged down by the wind and the waves of life. You need to know that what is over your head is still under Jesus' feet, that it is still under his authority, that it is still under his power, and that you might feel like you are sinking, but Jesus always has the power to pull you back up. Thank you, Jesus. I think that deserves a bigger cheer than that. What is over your head is still under Jesus' feet. But this is only part of the story. This is not the whole story by any means. One of the challenges of this account is that we focus on the miracle in the water and we forget about 11 miracles in the boat. Because those disciples who faithfully set out did not want to be on that lake any more than Peter did. They had to be compelled by Jesus to set out for the other side. And the storm does not only provide the background for Peter's miracle, but also for the miracle of the men within the boat. These men had shown obedience to Jesus by getting in the boat in the first place. They were not any less faithful to Jesus by staying in the boat. If anything, they were more faithful. Because while Peter partway across the lake, goes looking for a new word from God. The 11 stay faithful to his original command to go over to the other side. They are faithful to Jesus when they set out. They're faithful to keep rowing through the storm. And when Jesus' feet hit the deck of their boat, they find their miracle as the storm settles and they worship Jesus as the Son of God. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it is easy to think that the focus of this account is Peter's attempt to walk on the water. But the uncomfortable truth for all those of us who have, like myself, preached on the faith of Peter is that this is not really about him. This is about the authority of Jesus. It is about how Jesus rescues 12 disciples from the storm. It is about the moment when they realize that he rules the wind and the waves, that creation bows to his will, that the laws of physics submit to his authority. Ignore sinking Pete for a moment. What about Jesus? Apart from saving Peter, he does not so much as dip beneath the water. So it is entirely fitting that he steps into the boat. They worship him. The uncomfortable reality for those of us that would make Peter the hero of this story is that Jesus never commends him for getting out of the boat. Instead, Jesus questions him. He questions Peter's faith. He asks him why he's doubted. And we tend to read that as a question about why he sank, why he did not maintain his focus on Jesus. But what if Jesus is also asking why he got out of the boat in the first place? Because the others were following Jesus' command to get in the boat and row to the other side. It is Peter who takes a detour, Peter who comes up with his own plan. Perhaps we should not criticize Peter for moving toward Jesus in the middle of the storm, but we should also recognize that Jesus does not celebrate the steps that he takes. And if you think I'm being a bit harsh on Peter here, then I'd suggest that I'm only taking the same approach that he did. Because this account appears in 3 of the Gospels. But it is only in Matthew's Gospel that we hear about Peter walking on the water. Why is that significant? Well, because one of the other Gospels where this story appears is Mark's Gospel. And many scholars believe that Mark's Gospel was written by Mark from the account that he heard from Peter. Which means that even Peter himself omits the bit where he walks on the water. And maybe he does it because he's embarrassed, or maybe he does it because this isn't about Peter. This is about Jesus, who rules the wind and the waves. Maybe in hindsight, his miracle moment mattered a lot less than Jesus' display of deity. I'm laboring the point here because I'm keen to redress the balance of this account. We have focused too much on Peter and not enough on Jesus. And we've entirely ignored the 11 guys faithfully rowing away in the boat. Our attention is drawn to Peter's exploits, perhaps because we identify both with his bid for miraculous glory and because we see something of ourselves in how he fails. If this was written about in the media today, it would no doubt be Peter that would get the attention. The rise and fall of the simple fisherman who walked on the sea and then sank like a stone. But what about the 11? Faithfully rowing away, their eyes set on the other side. They too were committed to Jesus' cause. They didn't do anything flashy or spectacular. They just kept rowing. And they saw their miracle too. They saw Jesus for who he truly was, and they saw what was on the other side. As we read the rest of what happens in Matthew, we read of Matthew 14, we read of how many people from the place where they land gather, and everyone that touches the hem of Jesus' garment is healed. How a whole region is probably transformed by the power of Jesus' miracles in that moment. But actually, these are not miracles that garner the same attention as what happens on the lake. But imagine their significance. How many lives were transformed? Though staying in the boat may not have seemed as exciting as climbing out onto the waves, there was still something significant waiting on the other side. There is a contrast here between the spectacular and the significant. Now, I'm not saying that Peter was looking for fame and glory, but from a modern perspective, we can use this to justify exactly that. To justify getting out of the boat in search of something special, something to be celebrated. But what if the real power is staying in the boat until we reach the other side? That is to say that rather than being distracted by celebrity, by the special or the celebrated, we should set our sights on significance instead. Rather than being distracted by celebrity, we should set our sights on significance instead. What does that look like for us practically? What does it mean to be in the boat of faithful obedience, to do the journey of significance as those 11 disciples did? Well, firstly, I think it means a decision to get in the boat in the first place, to choose to follow Jesus and to pick up his cause. And maybe some of you are still exploring that. Maybe you've never connected with Jesus before. Maybe you're still thinking about it. And we count it as our privilege to play our part in your journey, whatever that might look like. But know this, nothing that you have ever done nor will ever do needs to separate you from a relationship with Jesus. But actually a decision to follow Jesus, the decision to get in the boat, I think is a decision that we must all make daily. You know, we often talk in our welcome parties about how one of the 4 things we want for people as part of our church is that they would follow Jesus. But that's not just a decision in a moment, that is a daily decision to follow him. It's actually about being compelled by his cause, which most simply put is that actually about knowing Jesus personally and sharing about that personal relationship with others. It is the cause of Christ which prompted that article you saw earlier. It is the cause of Christ that has shaped the way that we do church. We long to present the message of Jesus in a relevant way, to communicate his forgiveness, hope, and love in a way that makes sense to our world. And to get in the boat is to pick up his cause. The second thing that we need to do is to stay in the boat. Because Jesus' call too is a call to community. When I think about these 11 men gathered together in a boat, rowing together, working together, following after God's purpose, it makes me think about the church. This journey to follow God together. Just as we are called to follow together, we are called to stay together. Students, for those of you that are new in Norwich, can I encourage you that one of the best things you can do is to find a church and get connected quickly. I know that others will suggest that there's a value in looking around a bit and exploring your options, and I'm sensitive to that suggestion. I understand where it comes from, but don't waste time when you could get connected. Because I've found over the years that those who wait too long do not connect at all. And if you find something that you click with, whether it's here or somewhere else, then don't hesitate to get involved. Because God's will for us is that we would not do this journey alone. His intention is that we would live this life in relationship with others. More than that, we should be careful not to sacrifice community too lightly. We should not abandon ship for just any old opportunity. And I say that because I've seen too many people who stepped overboard looking for excitement, looking for newness and novelty when they would have been much better off staying in the boat. And be careful, too, not to spiritualize those moments. Now, I've heard people say that it's God's will for them to go elsewhere. And that may be true for some. But God's will for all is that they would be part of a community of believers. Being part of the church is part of what we would call God's general will. God's general will is his will for each and every person on this earth. And now God has a specific will for each of us. There is a call to each of our lives, but know this, God's specific will never fall outside of God's general will. What that means is that if you have a sense of purpose and meaning that you think will only be fulfilled outside the church, sharp observation coming, then it either isn't God-given or your idea of church is far too small. Let me say, too, that it is not just as part of the church that we should stay in the boat. It applies to all of our God-given relationships and many God-given opportunities as well. Marriage is a prime example. While many would abandon marriage or compromise it because of another opportunity that seems more exciting, God's will is that marriage would be until death us do part. And I think this applies in our work life too. God may call us to something new, but we shouldn't abandon what we have until he has. If you prayed and prayed and prayed that God would give you a job, and you got a job, be careful not to abandon that job too easily. There are many situations, in fact, where we should focus our attention on faithful obedience instead of looking to abandon ship. Because it may not always be easy or straightforward. We may find ourselves in the middle of a storm, convinced that being out of the boat is somehow safer than being in it. But the example of the 11 is of faithful obedience until we reach the other side. So we should get into the boat, being compelled by the cause of Christ, to know Him personally and to help others to do the same. We should stay in the boat. We should not jump ship for every opportunity, but focus our attention on faithful obedience. And thirdly, we should row. In John's account of this same encounter, it tells of how the disciples rowed for 3 or 4 miles across the lake. Now, I'm no nautical expert, but that sounds like a long way to me. The disciples did not expect that they would be magically transported to the other side. They did not think that the wind would carry them or the waves would wash them to their destination. They knew that they would have to row. They rowed even though the circumstances were against them, even though it took them headlong into the storm. And we too must be prepared for a bit of effort if we are to achieve significance in life. And if this boat represents the church, then rowing looks like volunteering. It is giving ourselves to play our part. And again, we can get caught up in what is special or exciting, but what matters most is that we actually row. You know, I've heard many people who say that they're not called to do this or called to do that. But what that often looks like, as far as I can tell, is sitting in the back of the boat while other people do the work. If we're to achieve all that God has set out for us, it'll take all hands to the oars, all on board, all pulling together to make it work. There is an opportunity for everyone within this community. Find a place to play your part. Don't go looking for something glamorous or exciting necessarily, but just find something you can do and give it a go. Again, we could easily say, well, you know, Peter waited until Jesus called him out to something. But significance is found in faithful obedience to doing whatever it takes, to playing our part even when it isn't exciting or special or fun. But let me speak too to those of you that have been around a while. Do you know it isn't easy to keep rowing when you feel like the wind is against you? It's not easy to row in the face of the storm, and perhaps today you feel worn out by your efforts. Perhaps you've rowed and rowed and rowed, and you're not sure if you can row anymore. Well, let me encourage you. Look around. Look at the other people that you are rowing alongside. Look at the people who depend on you, who rely on you. Look at them and their example to spur you on, and look and ask how you can spur them on too. And look ahead. Look to the horizon. Look to the significance that is on the other side. Look to the vision of our church to see the salvation of our city. Steel yourself and pull back again. Row again. Work again. Keep rowing. Keep going until we see the other side. Because there will come a moment when Jesus will step into your boat. And when in all of the effort and all of the challenge and all of the struggle of the storm, when all of a sudden you will see His glory and the storm will still. And just as the disciples did, then we will worship. But maybe we should start worshiping now. Maybe we should worship before we see the other side, because we expect to see the other side. Maybe we should row by volunteering, and maybe we should row by worshiping, declaring over and over again that our God is for us, that He will make a way, and that He is on our side. I need to finish. But I hope that what we have spoken about today will be helpful. You know, there is so much about our modern world that pulls us toward the wrong sense of success. We see the celebrities, or we look to social media, and we feel that our experiences should either be celebrated or special, and if they're not, that they're not worthwhile. Yet that is all a distraction to what gives us true meaning in life. There is a significance to be found in faithful obedience for those prepared to get in the boat, for those prepared to stay in the boat even when the storm sets in, and for those who will row and row and row, no matter how much work it may require. We have seen that rather than being distracted by celebrity, we should set our sights on significance instead. What would happen if we did? What might it mean if we set our sights on significance? Perhaps there is meaning, value, and fulfillment that we will only find if we press on to the other side. Perhaps we will come to understand ourselves and our world in a fresh way when we reframe our reference of success. Perhaps it sets us up for relationships that are more enduring, for our part in a purpose that goes beyond ourselves. And perhaps this is just what our world needs too. Perhaps they've had enough of celebrities. Perhaps they've found that no number of likes or comments can change how they feel inside. And perhaps if we live our lives for significance, not celebrity, it will prompt people to look for a different example instead. Perhaps in us, they could see Jesus. Perhaps in us, they could find his living hope. Perhaps if they heard his cause, encountered his love, their lives would be transformed as well. Perhaps we would see, as the disciples did, many hundreds of lives impacted. A whole region changed when we reach the other side. So rather than being distracted by celebrity, let's set our sights on significance instead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for joining us for this YouTube video presentation of our latest ministry. We hope you really enjoyed it, and if you did, why don't you subscribe to our channel? Better still, send us some feedback. If you have questions, let us know. We'd be more than happy to interact and engage with you. Thank you again, and we hope that you will join us soon. Why not try and make it to one of our services one Sunday? We're meeting here in Norwich from 10:30 a.m. and then again at 5 p.m. at night. We'd love to see you. God bless you.